He has toured with the likes of Robbie Krieger, the Cowsills, Bette Midler, Sarah Brighton, and one of the founding members of the great 80s band, the Knack, Mr. Berton Averre. Berton, how are we doing today?
We're doing just terrific, thanks.
Tell me a little bit more about your background. Like, where did you grow up exactly, and who were your musical influences?
Well, the first one is a lot easier to answer than the second. I'm a local boy. I grew up in the Valley, and I've been living in the Palisades for many, many years. Southern California born and bred. And as for my musical influences, I'm sure everybody who's honest says too many to mention. The 60s explosion was probably the most dynamic and important in my life, but I was already pretty much a music lover before the Beatles even showed up.
As far as the Knack is concerned, once group members Doug and his brother Jeffrey Fieger moved on over here to Los Angeles, you guys met up, and how did that all come about?
Jeff stayed very much in Detroit, Michigan, doing his thing.
Okay.
Doug came out here with his girlfriend, and that was back in 1970, I believe, maybe 71. And then in 73, I was kicking around, God, I guess you'd call it semi-pro. I was just starting to be like a professional musician, with an accent on professional. And there was this singer-songwriter named Rob Carmichael, and he had a play-for-pay band at very modest pay. And Doug came on I was the lead guitarist, of course, and Doug came on as the bass player. And after playing one day, he came over and said, I really like the way you play. I'm looking for somebody as a songwriting partner. You want to come write songs? And I said, sure. And that was the start of it.
And then you guys were playing a lot of great popular club gigs on the Sunset Strip, as well as, some guest jams with musicians such as Bruce Springsteen and Ray Manzarek. How did you guys get signed to your major recording label?
Well, thanks to the time that Bruce Springsteen jammed with us. I could answer both parts of the question. We were playing the Troubadour, which was kind of our home away from home, and somewhat of a local sensation. I mean, it was really very exciting. We were an unsigned band, and the crowds at the Troubadour just kept growing, and there was great word of mouth, and people would be having a great time. And musicians, like you mentioned, would come and get up and jam with us. The first one actually was Ray Manzarek, and Stephen Stills did it, Tom Petty did it, Eddie Money did it, and one night Bruce Springsteen got up and jammed with us. And up until then, our management had been courting record companies, like you always do, with not a whole lot, no bites. People were interested. They'd come and see us. And literally the day after Springsteen jammed with us, they all called, on the phone, wanted to talk.
Amazing what the boss can do, huh?
The power of music. What can you say?
You guys were signed in 77, 78, and then by 79, you guys are definitely on the musical map. Once your band released the Get the Knack debut album, it hit #1 for 5 consecutive weeks and sold over 2 million copies, and you were personally responsible for writing one of the biggest hits to hit the American charts, My Sharona. What's the background story on that timeless classic?
Well, first of all, again, I'm a stickler, and you have to remind people, as I'm sure they know, co-written. Doug and I wrote that together.
Okay.
Well, you never want. I mean, it's assumed, but as a writer, you feel guilty if the other guy's not mentioned.
No, I understand. Totally.
So
Absolutely.
anyway, how it came about? Well, it's funny. Doug sadly is no longer with us.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a different version of how it came about than I did. And just to be loyal to his memory, I will give you both, and you can decide who remembers better.
Okay.
Doug says he remembers me having the riff, the My Sharona riff, like a couple years before we ended up writing it for the Knack. And he was saying, that's great. I'm not ready. I don't know if it's a song yet. And then he met this girl, this Fairfax girl named Sharona Alperin. All of a sudden, he started fixating on Sharona and pursuing her, and the song was very much a part of the wooing process. I remember it a little more prosaically. I came up with the riff really probably about a week before I brought it into band practice, and he heard it for the first time, and that's when we as a Knack were first starting to gig. We'd probably played, 1 or 2 Troubadour gigs by that point. I brought the riff in. I had been inspired by listening to Elvis Costello's second album a lot and getting that just kind of, jungle music feel to it, and we started jamming on it in the rehearsal room, and Doug started scat singing over it, and he said, "Hey, let's go back and write that." So we went back to his apartment, which he was sharing with the girlfriend he had come out from Detroit with, and he starts singing My Sharona, and I'm going, "Hey man, Judy's in the next room," and he, being your absolute dyed-in-the-wool lead singer, said, "I don't care," and so we literally wrote that song in about 45 minutes.
That's a great story. Your follow-up hit album, But the Little Girls Understand, how was that album invented?
I'll tell you, honestly, from my ears, and as I remember it, Little Girls Understand was very much a continuation of what we were doing on the first album. Our third album, which you're forgiven for not knowing because nobody knows it, was called Round Trip, and that's when we really started to stretch and do different things that were always in our musical repertoire. We always had the chops to do different things, but the Knack was such a kind of consolidated idea of a kind of a band that on the second album we were doing all the songs that for us made sense and wasn't so much of a departure from the first album.
Right. I just kind of feel with, everybody has different ears when they listen to music. I just kind of thought that was a different type of album. And I know on that second album that you did co-wrote the great hit single, Baby Talks Dirty. Was there an interesting story behind that song, how that came about?
Doug had a dirty mind. Basically, that's I don't know how interesting that is or how original it is for a lead singer, but it certainly is the honest answer. Yeah, he just, was going into his descriptions.
I love it. And then you were just a part of the musical Vroom?
Vroom is the latest full-length musical that I've written with my writing partner, Rob Muir, who you should interview on your 80 station. He's Christopher Cross's writing partner.
Okay.
And we have been writing musicals together for several years now, and Vroom is one that we created with the playwright Mark Saltzman. It's artistically in great shape. The music is mid-60s, which sounds like it's right up my alley, which of course it is, but Rob and I were kind of resisting writing a rock musical for years, for reasons I won't even bother to go into.
So you just kind of do it for fun at this point?
Well, no, there's way too much work to call it doing it for fun.
Right.
And I do have, I'm very proud of our work. We really try to do a damn good job, and believe it or not, few people try all that hard to do a good job in musicals these days. They seem to be kind of creatively lazy. But I learned a long time ago in the music business, the artist should, as much as humanly possible, ignore the business part of it because it'll drive you nuts.
Yeah.
And it also introduces fear, and I don't have to tell you that fear is the killer of creativity. I mean, you have to feel loose, you have to feel open to ideas, and especially when you're writing something as involved as a musical theater score and a story, you just can't second-guess yourself all the time with what do people think of this, and what if they don't laugh at that, and that's, basically, that's the job of the audience to tell you that, and until then, you just have to kind of wrap yourself in a cocoon of disbelief that everything's fine.
Right. I totally agree with you on that. Now, what can we expect from you in the upcoming months, Berton?
Well, a couple things are kind of cracking. Rob and I wrote a show called Jungle Man, which is a send-up of the Tarzan and Jane type stories, and it got actually a really nice production in this regional theater in Wichita back in 2000, and it was one of those experiences of the politics in the entertainment business, the way the whole planning of that show and taking it to the next level fell apart, that just basically turns your hair white overnight, And the director and musical director of the show, who both are extremely talented, always loved the show, and we had, lost touch with them and kind of email them every once in a while. And this is over 10 years later, we get this email from Dan, the director, who is in Thailand, literally, because, people just have to go anywhere to make a living these days in the business. And he said, Michael and I, that was the musical director, never stop talking about Jungle Man. Every time we get together about new shows, we get back to that one because we liked it so much, and they're going to try to foot the bill for a reading in New York. And so we actually, after having shed our tears over a show that just pleased everybody no end, that never went anywhere, we actually have reason to believe we might get a second chance with it. So
Very cool.
And there's a show that we wrote after Jungle Man called Robin Hood, The Untold Story, that we have, it's a comedy as well, that we recently decided to reimagine the score as, again, a rock score, because it's kind of sad to say for me, if you do like a legitimate theater score, it kind of confuses people nowadays. They're so used to people just doing kind of warmed-over rock in a musical theater score. And so if you try to do something that sounds more like the classics, it's like I said, it kind of throws people, and so we figured, oh, screw it, you know, we are rockers. It's what we do best of all. It's in our blood. It's easy and fun, and so we're just rewriting the score, most of the songs, and just setting them in rock settings and having a blast doing that.
Very cool. A little something different than, doing the usual.
Yeah, well, many years ago, now it's many years ago, I think like early 90s, I just decided I don't want to be one of those guys that only has rock music, and as you get older, it's like you return to that or there's nothing. And I figured, well, I have pretty diffuse talent. I can do other things. And as I tell this story, so I looked around at all the other musical disciplines or entertainment disciplines and asked myself, which one is least likely ever to put a dime in my pocket? And so I chose musical theater.
I like that, Berton. That's good
and
stuff.
So far
it's worked out. All right, Berton. Thank you so very much.
Sure.